Okay, let's read this. Rule of law versus DEI. The tension between the rule of law and diversity, equity, and inclusion. DEI centers on how civil rights laws are interpreted. While the core legal statutes prohibit discrimination, modern federal enforcements and courts ruling increasing to find out that specific DEI policies violate the principles of former equality before the law. The core legal framework. Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, the foundational federal law prohibits employment discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, and national origin. It prohibits it, but nobody's doing nothing about it. The Equal Opportunity Employment Commission and the DOJ interpret this strictly to mean that employment actions cannot be motivated, even in part, by these protected traits. Well, nobody's stopping the discrimination, the racism in the workplace. We all have experienced that. So no, the rule of law, DEI, equal opportunity does not exist. I've dealt with the Equal Opportunity Employment Commission, and they told me to get a lawyer. I got fired. They said they fired me because I got hurt at work and I couldn't do the job anymore, which is still illegal. But they also, they wouldn't admit is because I was organizing to get the company to go union. And I was very open about it. I wasn't secretive about it, and that's why they fired me. And the reason I did that is because I was with this place 8 years. They had me train everybody, and within a year, everybody I trained made the same amount of money as me. And then they hired new guys as the foreman and had no experience, and I put in for it, but the foreman told me you weren't the white guy for the job. So no, the rule of law doesn't exist. If it did, there would have never been slavery. Emancipation was offered during the Revolution because nobody wanted to help. So the colonialists, they offered money to slave owners. They bought their slaves from them, offered emancipation. We win this war. You people get your freedom. Freed black men and women were there. Native Americans. A lot of immigrants. Hessians were there. Hessians gave up being mercenaries to, have a little land. Plow some fields, grow some food. But if you check in the history of Valley Forge, look up Valley Forge and go to Wikipedia, it gives you a short version, and go down to encampment. It'll tell you who were there. Women, children. Martha Washington was there, and she took her slaves. And, there was a lot of diversity, equity, and inclusion in the colonial army because not a whole lot of people wanted to fight. And then after they seized the day and wrote the Declaration of Independence, shortly after, they revoked, repealed, redacted emancipation. And they eventually fought for it again during the Civil War. The rule of law never existed. It still doesn't. Strictly to mean that employment actions cannot be motivated even in part by these protected traits. The 14th Amendment, this clause requires equal protection under the law, which doesn't exist, which the Supreme Court has utilized to strike down institutional policies like in higher education admissions that explicitly factor into an individual's race to achieve diversity. They were saying because minorities couldn't make the grade. I always made the grade. And I went above it. But, and in the workplaces, school, no matter how good I did, I always got poor grades. But my work was outstanding compared to the others. And the only recognition I got when I was going to college for computer electronics. And I didn't know it, the grading system. And I thought I was failing. until the other students told me, because they weren't talking to me. I got a 4.5 GPA on a midterm, or on grade on a midterm. And I thought I failed. I thought we were on a scale of 1 to 10. And then when I went home and I was depressed and went to go visit my dad and showed my mom, and she was like, oh, sorry. And then I showed my sister. She was older. She went to college. She graduated. And she just looked at me. She says, no, that's like an A+. I said, you're kidding me. I thought like, it was like a 1 to 10. She said, no, it's 1 to 4. 4 being an A. And, but still, that didn't do me any good. 2 years trying to get into a field. I've taken apart electronics, put them back together, fix things. And that was just from reading books before I ever went to college. I fixed cars. I didn't go to mechanic school. I didn't have the money. Why? Because society thought that because I'm of a Mexican descent, most people assumed I couldn't even speak English, and I wasn't going to argue it because, the 70s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000, to today, it's still difficult for a minority to get a job just because they're a minority. And then women, they get paid less than men for doing the same job. Where culture conflict arises. Legal exposure occurs when intentional DEI efforts cross the line from removing systematic barriers into granting preferential treatment. Practices that are legally scrutinized include, preferential treatment. Come on now, we all know that preferential treatment has always existed in society. From the time the Magna Carta was written, and by the time we started using the rule of law here, it's not happening. When people get criminal cases, the statistics show that, the darker skinned people get heavier sentences than the lighter skinned people. That's bias, that's prejudice. And that's prohibited in the rules of professional conduct and the code of judicial conduct. And who plays by that? If you've ever been in a court of law, you need the rules of professional conduct and the code of judicial conduct. Make sure everybody plays by the book. Otherwise, you're going to get screwed. Everybody that's been in court is getting screwed. And I'm doing my best to help them out, showing them these laws and trying to get them to help make sense of it. Quotas and targets, reverse hiring, promotion, or admission spots for specific demographic groups violate the basic tenet of formal equality. Exclusive program restricting internships, mentorships, and affinity networks strictly employees to a particular race or gender is increasingly challenged as a violation of civil rights. It challenges a violation? Yeah, it's violating the rule of law. I mean, that's the king of laws in a nation of laws. That's what the founding principle of the Declaration of Independence and the United States Constitution. It clearly states in both that we are endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights. Amongst these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And that isn't happening. That's been restricted. We wouldn't have sundown towns if the rule of law existed. If any of your public servants ever lived up to the oath. And you start with the common denominator, the rule of law, in both the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. It says exactly that. We are endowed by our Creator. And then you got people saying, no, we're a Christian country. No, we're a nation of laws. And when this country was founded, freedom of religion was guaranteed. But you got a lot of people out there trying to deprive other people of that freedom to practice their religion. No. You got to be a Christian. And what kind of Christian? There's so many different sects. How many different sects are there? Protestants, Catholics, Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And nobody practices the Christian religion the same. And as far as the dominant religion in this country, from my understanding, it's still the Protestants. And I'm Catholic, so I was never well received by the Protestants. They constantly put me down. I didn't care. I would just point and laugh at them. There would never have been the Nina movement. No Irish need apply when the Irish first started coming here. That's why so many of them wound up in Mexico and all parts of Latin America. There's a lot of Irish because they didn't like what was going on here when they came here, because they were forced to do to the Mexicans and the Native Americans what was being done to them in Ireland. They came from Ireland to get away from that, and then when they got here, they said, no, now you got to go do what was being done to you. And a lot of Irish found out the Mexicans were Catholic, and they were being put down by the Protestants, which were the military. Okay, many legal experts note that pursuing a diverse, equitable workplace is entirely possible under the rule of law, provided programs are executed via race and sex neutral practices. Organizations mitigate legal risk by broadening recruitment, reaching out to a wider, more diverse pool of applicants rather than narrowing the final candidate pool, like what now is happening in the present administration of our government. They're getting rid of all the minorities. And they're saying that they were hired because of DEI. No, they are allowed in because of the rule of law. Rule of law, they started using that, and they says, okay, well, we got to give these people a chance. Let's test them. You know damn well the Army, the Navy, the Marines, they aren't going to make somebody a general that isn't qualified. You got to go through quite a bit. And speaking as a minority, I've always had to work harder no matter what it came to. School, I had to work harder to get a decent grade, but yet my work surpassed others and they got better grades. In grammar school, I wrote papers for people and then wrote my own, and then they got a better grade than me. So it's, when I started high school, I did it for a couple people, did their homework for them, and I got caught by a teacher, algebra teacher. He told me if I didn't cut it out, he was going to fail me. And then he gave me an A. Not just because I stopped doing people's homework, but he said he'll grade me on my efficiency and my diligence. And he did. I'm pretty good at math as well. Addressing socioeconomic barriers, designing programs to assist underrepresented groups, discriminated groups. Let's quit saying underrepresented. Just say people being discriminated against. Addressing socioeconomic barriers, designing programs to assist underrepresented groups or economically disadvantaged individuals generally rather than specific protected traits. And that's kind of ridiculous. If they went by the grade, the knowledge, the skill, the work they do. I mean, if the rule of law did exist, DEI would never have had to. There would have never been a civil rights movement. Black Wall Street would still be up and running. Okay, organizations and legal professionals continue to debate the balance between upholding foundational civil rights legislation and advancing corporate diversity. For a deeper look at navigating these challenges, you can review the guidance laid out by the American Bar Association or consult corporate law analysts like those provided by Pearson Ferdinand LLP. Listen, no lawyers discuss the rules of professional conduct with you, the legal obligations of all attorneys and lawyers, and the code of judicial conduct. Nobody's making sure they're living up to it. That's why so many of you are getting screwed over in court. They're treating you like a Mexican, like me. I didn't know. It didn't matter how many laws I know. It didn't matter. that I knew that they were violating the rules, the codes, the rule of law, the letter of the law. So many laws, but yet they're going to say there's a difference between DEI and the rule of law. DEI was just a reinforcement for the rule of law. It's no secret that people are being fired from their jobs simply because of the color of their skin, or because they're women in the military. I've met and known a lot of brilliant women, strong, the strength, kick some butt. I've seen some women kick some guys' butt. Not that they were bigger or stronger, it's just they were better at fighting. So let's discuss that. The rule of law versus DEI. Diversity, equity, and inclusion. Okay, that means desegregation. Stop keeping people out because of the color of their skin, their race, their religion, their gender. Look in the rules of professional conduct and the code of judicial conduct and the preambles. It'll explain this to you. They cannot be biased, prejudiced. They can't hold anything, against you. They can't hold it because of your minority, you're a woman. But children and seniors don't have any rights as far as a court of law. They don't have due process. They don't get effective assistance counsel, which is totally ridiculous. How does the rule of law apply there? An older gentleman, taking care of himself, had family that stopped in and out. A distant relative came along and decided, hey, we're going to see what we can do and get this guy under guardianship so we can take what he got. And as long as they get a lawyer in first, no. So it's and then children. I was watching YouTube and some little girl she was in grade school. She got snippy with the teacher for some reason. And the teacher made a call, and next thing you know, the police are there. And they told her if she signed these papers, she won't get arrested and she don't have to go to court. And she signed those papers, and next thing you know, she's sitting in a juvenile detention center not knowing why she's there. And in the video, she's questioning, she's saying she's seen, Law and Order? She says, isn't there a thing as a due process? Don't I get a day in court? And they said it was because she signed that paper, but who was there to explain it to her? Did she read it? Nobody explained it to her. Did she have a lawyer? No, she didn't. I was watching a video where these young women, I think it was in Tennessee, somewhere in a southern state, where they were forced to get married and through, whether it be through parents or the court, and they didn't want to get married, but they have rights too. When does the rule of law apply there? People are saying, oh, well, because she's pregnant. Oh, that's no reason to get married. But either way, the rule of law versus DEI. DEI is basically desegregation. But if desegregation actually was in effect, the rule of law, would there be redlining? Would there be redlining? Remember, all public servants are required to do what's in the public interest. Okay, so you'll find a lot of these laws violate logic because they're not in the public interest. You'll say that doesn't make sense. So just think simplistically. If it doesn't make sense to you, and if it's not for the betterment of your life, it's illegal. Like these tax codes that were written, favors the rich than the poor. Look up what are taxes for. Okay, I did a video on that. It tells you it's for infrastructure, medical, schools. It's not meant to give to big corporations. so they don't have to spend their money. But look up what are the purposes of taxes. But the rule of law doesn't exist. DEI doesn't exist. They just took their quota from affirmative action. They wouldn't have had to create affirmative action if there wasn't discrimination in every workplace in the government. When I tried to get on the police force when I was in my 20s, and there was no Latinos on the police force in Chicago. And we protested, and I went, and this crazy lady, she was a sergeant, and she was there, and she didn't like me because she worked in Brighton Park, in the field house, in the park by my house, but nobody knew she was a cop. I didn't know she was a cop until she pulled that crap on me, and she went and told everybody else, the other cops, about me, and next thing you know, I get a letter, and I got turned down. I passed the aptitude test. I was told I did really good. And the physical test, I surpassed most of the people there. In my youth, I was always energetic, very physical, physically fit, kept in shape. So it's no fact. I mean, it is a fact or there's no fact that the rule of law exists. And DEI, it was minimal. This is all smoke and mirrors. Corporate puffery. This is puffery. You got lawyers trying to make it seem palatable, plausible. But use your logic. Every woman out there. I was out there with a lot of you. I see it with some places I worked, and you went to get jobs. And one place I worked at, and one woman was mad because it was in a steel mill, and they were going to pay her less, and she raised hell. And but when she got in the union, that's one thing about unions. They don't give a crap. You're just a union member, and you're not going to get discriminated against because of your race, your gender, your religion, if you're a woman. That's what unions are good about. So the rule of law versus DEI, which are unequivocally the same. The rule of law, people started talking about it. When I was a kid, who was it? Lyndon Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act, desegregation. Why would they have to do that if the rule of law existed? It doesn't. The rule of law doesn't. And before you go and talk to any lawyer about this here subject matter, talk to them about the rules of professional conduct, the code of judicial conduct, the legal obligations of all lawyers and judges. The legal obligations of all lawyers and judges. If you read the preamble, it'll tell you that all lawyers are public servants. Judges are because they're behind the bench, but you think because this lawyer works for this person, that person, a company. Read the rules of professional conduct, preamble, line 12. All lawyers are required to do what's in the public interest. The oath comes first, and the oath was written, for them where they're supposed to, live up to the Constitution, serve and protect, but they don't. The Constitution was written to serve and protect we the people. So they're supposed to be your dedicated servants. They're supposed to do what's in your best interest. Like look what they're doing to to a lot of public property. They're selling it off, which is forbidden in the public trust doctrine. When I was watching those Albanians tear down that place that the Trumps wanted to put up in their wetlands, and reminded me of the Keystone Pipeline. alligator Alcatraz. I mean, there's environmental protections that are mentioned in the public trust doctrine, laws, but nobody's doing that. That's required by the oath. You know, they're supposed to enforce all laws. In the preamble in the Code of Judicial Conduct and the Rules of Professional Conduct, it says that all judges and lawyers are supposed to apply all the rules and the codes and any other applicable laws. But they cherry pick. They cherry pick, and the laws that they don't use are the rules and the codes. Go over the rules and the codes, the Rules of Professional Conduct and the Code of Judicial Conduct, to find out how honest your lawyers and judges are. I've been on this quest since I was a kid. And when I finally found the Rules of Professional Conduct and the Code of Judicial Conduct, it was easy to come to the conclusion that everybody in the courtroom is operating under the color of law. You know, reporting misconduct is mandatory in the rules and the codes. And every day in every court, lawyers and judges violate the rules and the codes, and nobody reports that. There's supposed to be zero tolerance on violating the rules or the codes. You know, that's violating the oath. That's deprivation of rights. So some of the stuff, the laws I give you, but this is a matter of opinion here. This is not the law. This is people in the legal field discussing the law and then telling you to talk to lawyers about it. Or consult corporate law analysts like those provided by Pearson Ferdinand LLP, the American Bar Association. I started filing with stuff in them in the 80s, and they never answer me. Why? Because I keep questioning every state's validity on upholding the oath by living up to the rules and the codes. And they don't. And that's why so many of you people watch my videos, because I'm giving you the laws. Some young lady put a comment. I made a post where it says all public servants are required to do what's in the public interest. And I put the law behind that, which led to the basic obligations of public service. And she said that wasn't true. I said, it's a law. It's on the internet. Just put that little question up there. Are all public servants required to do what's in the public service? Okay, let's do that right now. I just did that. She didn't believe me. But she's going by her opinion, what she thinks she knows. You know, I read the basic obligations of public service in grammar school. I was in 7th grade. Wow, that was a pretty long time ago. I was early 70s. Yes, by law and ethics mandate, all public servants are required to prioritize the public interest. This principle often summarizes public service as a public trust. Legally obligates government employees to put loyalty to the Constitution, laws, and ethical principles above private financial gain or personal interest. Like enforcing the rule of law. You know, what's written in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. That's not happening. I've been I've been living in fear of my life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness all my life. If you were Mexican, you would understand that. I born and raised here. My mom was. Her father was a World War II vet. You think anybody cared? The police sure didn't. The court sure didn't. The schools sure didn't. I used to have people in the neighborhood that used to hunt me down. Chase me to school, from school, beat me up in school, before school, after school, at lunchtime, at recess. There was the neighborhood group of white supremacists were called the Heads, help eliminate and destroy spics. And they spent a lot of time hunting me down. And the police would, if I fought back with them and beat somebody's ass, I got beat up and arrested by the cops. You weren't allowed to fight back then. For the most part, you aren't now. Okay, the foundation of these requirements includes several concrete obligations. 14 principles of ethical conduct. Federal employees are bound by strict rules codified in 5 CFR 26335.101, which outlines standards of impartiality, honesty, and transparency. No impropriety. Civil servants are prohibited from using public office for private gain. Accepting improper gifts or using non-public government information for personal benefit. Insider trading. Impartiality. Employees are legally required to act impartially and must not give preferential treatment to any private organization or individual. But you know, our government officials do that. I was hearing about no bid contracts. That's illegal. These tenets trace back to the foundational obligations outlined by the U.S. Department of Interior, and I did a video on that, and U.S. Government of Ethics, Office of Government Ethics. So there's ethical violations. You can file for ethical violations, violating the oath, that's ethical violations. Okay. Okay, so let's go back. And U.S. Department of Interior, that'll tell you about the basic obligations of public service. My sister, she was older, and she had to take the Constitution test before she graduated 8th grade. I had to know what that was about. So, I mean, I passed it with flying colors, and I had to wait 3 years to take it. But anyways, while I was waiting, I was reading more and more. I had to find out a lot of things because there's no backstory and a lot of that. And like I said, I went from the Constitution, Declaration of Independence, back to the Magna Carta. But this I found this through my history teacher in 7th grade. Was it 7th or 8th grade that I brought this up in? It's not on the curriculum. That's not what we're studying. You know, but this was important to me, and it should be important to you. Thomas Jefferson enunciated the basic principles of public service. When a man assumes a public trust, he should consider himself as public property. The sentiment is expressed by numerous others over the time, becoming familiar principle. Public service is a public trust. To ensure public confidence in the integrity of the federal government, Executive Order 12674, as amended, forms a framework for ethical behavior required and expected of all federal employees as a condition of public service. As a condition. If you can't do this, then you can't be in public service. You are expected to adhere to these fundamental principles of ethical behavior. Public service is a public trust requiring you to place loyalty to the Constitution, the laws, and ethical principles above private gain. You shall not hold financial interests that conflict with the conscientious performance of your duty. Who isn't doing that? Everybody's complaining about how much Trump and his family and all his co-conspirators are making. You cannot engage in financial transactions using non-public government information or allow improper use of such information to further any private interest. I hear a lot of you complaining about it. Use the basic obligations of public service. You shall not accept, pursuant to such a reasonable expectations as provided by regulations, solicit or accept any gift or other item of monetary value from any person or entity seeking official action, from doing business with or conducting activities regulated by your agency, or whose interests may be substantially affected by the performance or non-performance of your duties. You shall make no unauthorized commitments or promise to any kind of any kind purported to bind the government. You shall put forth honest effort in performance of your duties. Yeah, somebody should get Congress up on this. What do they spend, like 3 months out of the year there? They spend most of the time golfing and traveling around the world, campaigning in other countries. I've seen these idiots campaigning for politicians in another, I forgot who it was, but he lost anyways. You shall disclose waste, fraud, abuse, corruption to the appropriate authorities. That's a whistleblower act. I don't know if you ever read about that. I knew about this a long time ago, and I was shocked that Snowden, that guy Edward Snowden, ran off to Russia. All he was doing was informing about these improprieties, and they didn't like it, and so he said it's got to be stopped. And he couldn't get the higher ups to stop it because they were the ones that created these improprieties, and trying to get him to go along with it, giving him an unlawful order. Remember what I told that video I did? Look up unlawful orders. Nobody can give them, and nobody can take them. And saying I was just taking orders will not hold up in a court of law. Okay, and saying you were ignorant of law, that's no excuse either. Look it up. It's on the net. You shall disclose waste, fraud, abuse, and corruption to appropriate authorities. And that's what I've been doing. If you looked at all my videos, that's what I'm doing. Disclosing waste, fraud, abuse, and corruption. And I've been reporting it to all the appropriate authorities, but they just ignore me. That's why I'm trying to get as many people to do what I do. As many as possible. That's the only way things are going to change, people. When it comes to we the people, all we got is each other. We got to start looking out for each other because all our servants are robbing us blind. You shall satisfy in good faith your obligations as citizens, including all just financial obligations, especially those as federal, state, and local taxes that are imposed by law. You should adhere to all laws and regulations that provide equal opportunities for all Americans, regardless of race, religion, color, sex, including pregnancy, marital status, natural origin, age, disability, family medical history, or genetic information, particularly genetic information, political affiliation, or military service. Right now, a lot of people are getting kicked out of service because they didn't vote for Trump, and they weren't loyal to him. They didn't give him an oath of loyalty. The oath goes to the Constitution first. If you put anything before that, that's violating the oath. That's deprivation of rights. That's treason. You shall not use your public office for private gain. You shall act impartially and not give preferential treatment to any organization or individual. You shall protect and conserve federal property and shall not use it for other than authorized activity. You shall endeavor to avoid any actions creating the appearance that you are violating the law. Let me read that again. Let me reiterate that. You shall endeavor to avoid any actions creating the appearance that you are violating the law. The standards of ethical conduct or employees of executive branch, 5 CFR Part 2635, the DOI Supplement Ethics Regulations. Come on, so this is saying you can't discriminate, and that's what? Because it tells you right here. Regardless of race, race has always been an issue. Religion's a really big issue now because people want to make this a Christian-only country. Color, well, that's always been a factor in hiring and now firing. Sex, like I say in the military, they want women out. Parental status, national origin, that's a factor. People, just because of where their family may have come from another country, you hold it against them. Age, that's a big factor. Disability, that's been really hard for me. I've been trying, and, I'm in a wheelchair, but I can't get a job anywhere in a wheelchair. I tried. I even went to Walmart, and I just got looked down. What can you do? Family medical history or genetic information, political affiliation. Right now, the Republican Party is going after people that are Democrats, even though they're not affiliated. They're just, Democratic as voters, but vote Democrat. But Right now, they're getting fired because of their political affiliations and because they're not putting loyalty to a person. They're putting loyalty to a person before the oath. Okay, let's go there. Loyalty to the Constitution is a fundamental principle requiring all American military personnel, law enforcement officers, and federal officials to swear an oath to uphold the nation's supreme law and the democratic system. Supreme law, the rule of law, the Constitution. If you look at the supremacy clause, it'll tell you the Constitution is the law of the land. Even the U.S. Supreme Court, who was a Thurgood Marshall, to quote him, any law repugnant to the Constitution is void. This commitment ensures that service and obligation are given to enduring legal principles rather than to a specific individual or political party. Now we got the DOJ and other, they're taking orders from a political party and an individual. No, look up the DOJ website. That'll give you all their duties. All right. So remember, anybody putting loyalty to anybody before the Constitution. The Constitution always comes first, people. It says right here, this commitment ensures that service and allegiance are given to the enduring legal principles rather than a specific individual or political party. That's called communism when you do. That's what they do for dictators. The oath of office, federal laws dictate that all individuals in civil service, uniformed service, and judicial branches must take the oath of office to support and defend the Constitution. This mandate is rooted in Article 7 the United States Constitution, requiring all state and federal legislators, executive officers, and judges be bound by the oath to the national Constitution. So remember, your state rights can't override constitutional rights. If they're repugnant to the United States Constitution, the national Constitution, they are void. They cannot stand. They have no strength. I mean, it's in a sense, it's illegal to even try that. It's un-American. It's not patriotic. Can't take the oath of office, get in office, and then just spit on and shit on the Constitution. Military tradition. For armed forces, this loyalty is a core pillar of civil military relations. A military oath dedicates a troop must obey orders of the president and their appointed officers, but only according to regulations and a uniform code of military justice, and nobody can give them an order to violate the Constitution, okay? The oath they took, that's illegal. Ask anybody in the Judge Advocate General's office, JAG-offs. Civilian control. This requirement prevents the military from acting as an instrument of a single leader or a political fraction, intentionally separating U.S. troops from older archaic customs of swearing fealty to monarchs or commanders. Precedents of law. If any order conflicts with the Constitution or established laws of war, the service member legal duty is to the law. West Point tradition. The United States Military Academy at West Point heavily emphasizes this concept in its curriculum. This site features a famous constitutional corner in the plaque serving as a physical reminder that officers pledge allegiance to the basic law. The Constitution, that's the basic, that's why they say it's the land of, first big set of laws to be written, Legal history and framework. The concept traces back to the founding fathers who sought to prioritize a national sense of identity and constitutional order over provincial or localized loyalties. The Supreme Court has historically upheld the legitimacy I'm sorry, I'm tired, of constitutional loyal oaths, provided they do not infringe upon protected constitutional freedoms. People loyalty, placing your loyalty to the president or political party, and they're placing their allegiances, their loyalties to their contributors, to their Wall Street, to their financial contributors to Wall Street. That's where they're getting all this inside information to where to invest. But I love me the Constitution, and trying to give up getting our government, our public servants, to live up to the oath. That's impossible, especially for one person, me, just me alone. I'm the only guy that does the videos, and like I said, I read a lot. I learned to read before I started school. Just never stopped. Okay, so remember, loyalty to the Constitution comes first. And the Constitution is based on the rule of law. And what do they say through the whole thing? They talk to you about DEI. No discrimination based on ethnicity, marital status, religion. Discrimination is discrimination. Violating the rule of law is violating the rule of law. And why they had to come up with DEI to enforce the rule of law, I don't know. But then again, because discrimination is a prominent factor in this country. People yelling at other people, get out of my country, go back to where you're from. I've heard that all my life. And I'm from Chicago. Chicago is a city in the state of Illinois, which is a state of the United States of America. The United States is in the continent of America. These people are really stupid. Really stupid, really dumb. Moronic. I mean, they're not just undereducated, they have no education. No education at all. And did anybody ever read the Constitution? That's what I tell them. Didn't you ever read the Constitution? Some lady was telling me my post about what was it on? Oh, all public servants are required to do it in the public interest, legally required. So you're like, no, that's not true. Yes, it is. Just because your public servants don't live up to the oath doesn't mean it's not true. And then I'm giving you all this stuff required by the oath. This is required by the oath, that's all. Loyalty to the Constitution. The Constitution is the content of my character, which makes the people the content of my heart. And this is why I work so hard, been doing it for so long. I would live and die for it, and I nearly died. Trying to get people to live up to the law, the rule of law. And I haven't slept in almost 2 days, and I have PTSD. When you die a death like I should have. I have no idea how I survived that, but I did. And it weighs heavy on me. And mostly because it's happening to you, all of you. My people, we the people. As I said, the Constitution is the content of my character. The Constitution was written to serve and protect we the people. And I take that seriously. And that makes we the people the content of my heart. In the words of Kazimir Pulaski, I come here to defend freedom, to live or die for it. He died on the battlefield in the Revolution. And I may not have served in the military, but I've been in this war all my life, the race war, the privation of rights, people constantly violating the Constitution, violating the oath they took. And how many citizens can't even accept the fact that I am a citizen. They just don't like me because of the color of my skin. Tupac used to say, what was that song? My skin is my sin. I've been saying since I was a kid, my color is your curse. Don't make it mine. I don't consider your color my curse. My color is your curse. But Tupac said it a different way. My skin is my sin. I love me the Constitution. And that's why I use the Constitution so much. Some people try to correct me on the law, and I have to constantly remind them, the United States Constitution comes first. Any law written repugnant to the United States Constitution is void. And the people that these arguments take place with are mostly lawyers. And those conversations never last very long. Fortunately for me, there's a lot of things I read that I couldn't forget. The Oath of Allegiance. That's what we take, the Pledge of Allegiance, but it's the Oath of Allegiance. I promise that I will protect the Constitution and all laws from all enemies from other countries. And it says foreign and domestic. And right now, you're dealing with domestic terrorism if your public servants are violating the Constitution, violating the rule of law, showing prejudice, bias, favoritism. Remember, their oath is to you. The oath they took is to serve and protect you from wayward servants, from enemies, foreign and domestic. Forefathers wrote the Constitution. I did a video on that. Usurpations of rights. They specifically meant the right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. And I've been denied that all my life. Okay, the oath of allegiance to the Constitution. I do solemnly swear to affirm that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and I will bear true faith to the allegiance to the same, and that I take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose or evasion. But everybody has mental reservation and purpose evasion once they get in office. There's this one annoying guy from New York. I forgot what his name was. Helping with charities and then stealing their money and oath of enlistment. Okay, let's see. What are these other questions? Where is the loyalty to the Constitution plaque located? Who can invoke the 25th Amendment against the president? Whenever the vice president, majority, either principal officers or the executive, that's old news. If the Congress, within 21 days after receipt of a letter written declaration, or if Congress is not in session within 20 days after, Congress is required to assemble determined by 2/3 vote of both House, and the President is unable to discharge the powers and duties. Military personnel swear allegiance to the Constitution and serve the American people. About the Senate, Constitution, oath of office, loyalty and loyalties. Why does one swear loyalty to the Constitution and not the government? I think we went over that in the basic obligations of public service, am I right? I mean, look at right now. It says right here. The commitment ensures that the service and allegiance are given to enduring legal principles rather than a specific individual or political party. And you know that's a lot of this, there's a lot of this going on. Unlawful orders. An unlawful order is a directive that violates the Constitution, federal statutes, or military regulations, or the Uniform Code of Military Justice, and international law. And you know why they say international law? Because democracy is, like, a lot of countries, and it's supposed to be the same everywhere. I mean, there's only, things that are either democratic or they aren't. And to require to obey lawful orders, but they have the right and duty to disobey manifestly unlawful commands. I've seen some politicians telling the military not to take those illegal orders, and then they get arrested for saying, hey, if you take those lawful orders, you can be charged. You can't say just taking orders. It even says in the military code that no, you can't take any orders that violate the Constitution. Saying just taking orders, that's not a plausible defense. And not knowing the law, that doesn't work either. Look up ignorance of the law. See, here you got the politicians literally telling these people, don't put yourself in harm's way, and then they get arrested or some silliness. I mean, I don't see why the Judge Advocate General's office, the JAG-offs, why they didn't all get up out there and say, hey, guys, you're in the military, we're in the military, if you do this, we're going to have to lock you up. But I'm quite sure you didn't know about this either. There's a lot of things you didn't know. And that's what I'm doing, trying to deprive you of your ignorance of the law so you don't go to jail. All right, a lot of the stuff I know kept me out of jail. So you really got to get with this. And stop giving your opinion in the comments. If you haven't read the law, if you haven't watched the whole video, you really shouldn't be commenting. So I'm going to give you a polite STFU if you're going by your opinion, your thoughts and feelings. No, I'm going by the law, literally, word for word to the letter. You know what the penalties are for violating the letter of law? Let's go there. Oh. Sorry, my hands are shaking. Well, that's what you're dealing with. Conspiracy against rights under the color of law. All right. Penalties for conspiracy against rights under the color of law, codified under 18 U.S.C. 241, range from fines and probation to imprisonment or the death penalty, depending on the severity of the crime and whether it results in death or involves aggravating factors like kidnapping or sexual abuse. Imagine if all those detainees in those minority jails, they have a right to due process. The Constitution says so. And I'll hold you to the letter of law on that. Can't just give what you think it means. So let's go. You got to go by what it says. Violating law means breaking the strict legal wording or statute regardless of the context. Purpose of underlying intent of the law, because the letter of the law simply represents the law as written. The technical penalties for violating it span the entire spectrum of civil, administrative, and criminal punishments. However, how the legal system enforces these penalties depends heavily on whether the violation also contradicts the spirit of the law. Its intended purpose. Well, in the spirit of the law, I use the letter of the law so that everybody hears and says the same thing. So there's no disinformation. You know what the penalties are for disinformation? There are a lot of penalties for violating the letter of the law. People see, look, this is ridiculous. It says letter of law versus spirit of the law. It's a conducive relationship. It's symbiotic. It's they're relying on each other. Okay, what was it? Violating the oath of public service does not carry a single universal penalty. Instead, consequences range from removal of office, civil fines, lengthy prison sentences, depending on the severity of misconduct and a specific jurisdiction, anti-corruption, or ethic laws. Removal from office. Officials can be removed from their positions through mechanisms like recall elections, impeachment, or executive disciplinary action. All right, people, these are just a lot of things you should look up. All right, sometimes I get some knuckleheads in the comments. Oh, that's not true. I don't think so. I didn't ask for your opinion. I'm giving you the law. I don't need your opinion on the law. You can't argue the written law. I'll hold you to the letter of law in every court of law. Stop being a knucklehead. All right, people, I don't mean to complain. It's just that I'm doing this to encourage people to look up all these laws I talk about, because none of your public servants are living up to the oath, because everybody's out there violating the letter of the law. Everybody out there violating the rule of law. A cop got upset at me because I reminded him about the oath, that violating the oath is deprivation of rights, and that's a federal crime. And now you got your phone, you can look it up. It is. Violating the oath is a federal crime. It's called deprivation of rights. And look up penalties for deprivation of rights. And then I told him about, the policeman's code of conduct. Look it up. It's right there. Get your phone out. Look it up. It's on the net. You can't do this. Last time a cop pulled me over, you know what I pulled you over for? Yeah, for your quota. You're trying to fill your quota, right? No. Are you sure? You guys usually, is at the end of the month, you know what I pulled you over for? Well, I'm waiting for you to tell me. Why did you pull me over? Well, do you know why? Why don't you tell me why? And they get upset, but I have to remind them the penalties for violating the oath of public service, the rule of law, because it is the way you're supposed to, the rule of law says what? The law applies equally to everybody, but there are a whole lot of cops out there, they're above the law. Violating the oath, one cannot claim qualified immunity. That's deprivation of rights. One cannot claim qualified immunity for deprivation of rights. Deprivation of the rights is knowingly and willingly depriving you of your constitutional rights. And that's against the law. Okay, so no matter who the public servant is, remember, deprivation of rights, violating the oath, and it all goes together. But see, it's just they're using your ignorance of the law against you. And once again, as I said before, I will repeat myself. I'm doing my best to deprive you of your ignorance of the law because you could go to jail for it, okay? And especially that lady who was telling me that what I was saying wasn't true. And I wasn't even saying it. I used AI to read it. Okay, people, you have a good night. I want to... I'm just so aggravated with that woman. She could have looked it up. And I even put the law there, put it into captions. Okay, people, have a good night. May your Creator always be with you and rain many blessings. I wish you a long life and good health. Nothing but peace and happiness, joy and love. You have a good night. Thank you.